The weirdest part of building wealth is that 0 to $100,000 can feel harder than 1 million to 2 million. That sounds fake until you run the math. In one simple example, someone investing $500 a month at a 7% annual return takes about 11.1 years to go from 0 to $100,000. But someone starting with 1 million, adding that same $500 a month, and earning that same assumed return can reach $2 million in about 9.4 years. So the smaller number can feel harder than the bigger number. This video isn't a promise that money gets easy. It's not a guarantee that a market return will show up on schedule. It's a story about workshare. At every milestone, we're going to ask one question. Who's doing the work now? You or the pile of money already sitting there? To make the math easier to follow, we'll use a fictional saver named Marcus. Marcus isn't a recommendation. He's just a clean example. He puts away $500 a month. The example uses a 7% nominal annual return, compounded monthly, because it gives us a simple middle lane to explain the mechanism. The real world will be messier. The boundary matters early. A video about $100,000 and $1 million can slide into fantasy very quickly. The internet loves a clean wealth ladder because it feels like a cheat code, but the useful version is narrower. We're not asking, how does everyone get rich? We're asking why one stretch of the ladder feels emotionally brutal while a later stretch can move faster in the math. And before we even start, it's worth saying why $100,000 feels so strange. It's a huge amount of money in normal life. The Federal Reserve's 2022 survey of consumer finances put median family net worth at about $192,900 and the 25th percentile at about $27,100. So $100,000 isn't small, but it also doesn't feel rich because net worth includes homes, vehicles, retirement accounts, debts, and everything else. That's the psychological trap. The first $100,000 is big enough to matter, but not big enough to make you feel free. You can look at it and think, I worked this hard, and this is still only the beginning? Here's why it feels that way. In the $500 a month example, Marcus reaches the first $100,000 after about 133 months. By then, he has put in about $66,500 of his own deposits. The investment growth is about $33,600. So the account is growing, but most of the first milestone came from Marcus doing the work himself. This is the first reveal. Early compounding is real, but it's quiet. It doesn't feel like a machine yet. It feels like a person dragging a machine uphill, wondering why the machine isn't helping. That matters emotionally because early investing can feel almost insulting. Marcus does the hard part every month. He skips something, he moves money before it gets spent, he waits, then he checks the account and the growth line still looks small. The mistake is thinking small early growth means the idea failed. In reality, the machine is still being assembled. But then $100,000 starts to do something important. The same percentage finally becomes visible dollars. At 5%, $100,000 can mean about $5,000 of annual growth. At 7%, about $7,000. At 10%, about $10,000. Those aren't promises, they're assumption examples, but they show why the first $100,000 matters. The pile is finally large enough to put a number on the board. That's the part many motivational money videos skip. They say, the first $100,000 is the hardest, as if the number has magic hidden inside it. It doesn't. What changes is the base. A small percentage on a tiny base is a tiny dollar amount. The same percentage on a bigger base starts to feel like a second deposit. Now move the meter to $500,000. At a 7% assumption, $500,000 can produce about $35,000 of annual growth. Compare that with deposits. Saving $500 a month is $6,000 a year. Saving $1,000 a month is $12,000 a year. Suddenly, the account isn't just sitting there. In this example, it can be doing more annual work than the saver. This is why $500,000 can be the hidden inflection point. Not for every person, not in every market, but as a mental model, it's where the workshare meter starts to look different. The question stops being how much can I force into the account and becomes when does the account start pulling with me? That $35,000 number also needs translation. It's about 2,917 septibus a month of growth force in the example. That doesn't mean Marcus can spend it like a paycheck. Markets move around, taxes may matter, the account may fall the next year, but as a way to understand scale, it changes the feeling. The balance can start producing movement that looks larger than the monthly sacrifice that built it. And $500,000 isn't a casual threshold. In the Fed's 2022 data, among families ages 35 to 64 who participated in an IRA or defined contribution plan, the mean balance was about $331,400. The top decile was about $913,300. So a $500,000 investment balance sits in serious territory. It's not fantasy money, but it's also not a normal little checkpoint. This is also where honesty matters. Not everyone has equal access to the engine. The Fed data shows stock ownership, direct and indirect, is much more common higher up the income distribution. In 2022, about 34% of families in the bottom half held stock in some form, compared with 78% in the upper middle group and 95% in the top decile. So the point isn't just get $500,000. That's not useful. The point is that wealth milestones are not only about discipline, they're also about starting base, access, time, income, risk, and whether the money gets to stay invested long enough to work. This is where a lot of simple wealth advice becomes too flat. Two people can hear the exact same lesson about compounding and face completely different conditions. One person has room in the budget, a retirement plan, and no emergency draining the account. Another person has the same motivation but a car repair, rent pressure, or debt interest grabbing the money first. The math is clean, life is not. Here's the midpoint reframe. Stop asking only, how do I get to a million? Ask, when does my account become a second worker? In a $1,000 a month example at 7%, growth is about 37% of the annual work at 100,000. At 500,000, growth is about 74% of the annual work. At a million misin reclau. At $1 million, it's about 85%. At $2 million, about 92%. That workshare lens is the whole video. It doesn't tell you what to buy. It doesn't tell you what return to expect. It just makes the hidden machine visible. One lever is the starting balance. One lever is the monthly contribution. One lever is the return assumption. One lever is time. And then there are drag levers: fees, taxes, inflation, withdrawals, and bad timing. For Marcus, this changes the emotional story. At the beginning, he's not failing because the account feels slow. He's in the person-powered phase. At $100,000, the machine has started, but it's still small. Around $500,000, the machine can start looking like a second worker. By $1 million, the same return assumption can create movement that would have sounded impossible back at zero. That's a better way to think about the milestones. The first phase is person-powered. The second phase is shared work. The later phase is pile-powered. Those phases don't arrive on the same date for everyone because the levers differ, but the pattern explains why the first stretch can feel so emotionally expensive. You're building something before it's big enough to help you back. You can see this in the full milestone map. With $1,000 a month at a 7% nominal assumption, the example reaches $100,000 in about 6.7 years. It reaches $500,000 in about 19.6 years. It reaches $1 million in about 27.6 years, and it reaches $2 million in about 36.4 years. The first $100,000 is a grind. The later milestones are still hard, but the balance is doing more of the lifting. But watch how fragile the timing is. If Marcus puts away $500 a month, the first $100,000 takes about 12.2 years at 5%, 11.1 years at 7%, and 9.9 years at 10%. The $1 million to $2 million jump takes about 12.8 years at 5%, 9.4 years at 7%, and 6.8 years at 10%. The direction of the story is clear, but the calendar changes a lot. And the calendar won't move in a straight line. Investor.gov says large company stocks have lost money on average about 1 out of every 3 years. That matters because milestone charts can make wealth look smooth. Real accounts don't move like a clean animated line. They jump, stall, fall, recover, and sometimes test your patience exactly when you thought the machine was finally working. Recent history makes that obvious. One visual can show the S&P 500 return path from 2021 through 2025, a strong year, then a negative year, then strong years again. The voiceover doesn't need to read every number. The point is simpler: an average return isn't a schedule. The long-term history still matters. Duran's historical return data shows how powerful compounding has been over very long periods. A $100 investment in the S&P 500 at the start of 1928 became more than $1.15 million by 2025 in that data. But that's history, not a guarantee. It explains why the machine can be powerful. It doesn't promise the machine will be polite. This is also why patience sounds simple until it has a dollar amount attached. Waiting through a bad year with $5,000 invested feels one way. Waiting through a bad year with $500,000 invested feels very different. The swings get bigger because the base gets bigger. That's the same force that makes later wealth build faster, showing up in a way that can feel uncomfortable. Fees are another quiet drag. Investor.gov gives a hypothetical example of $100,000 growing at 4% for 20 years. With a 0.25% annual fee, it ends near $208,000. With a 0.50% fee, near $198,000. With a 1.00% fee, near $179,000. Same starting pile, same hypothetical return, different friction. So the clean story needs a messy footnote. The bigger the balance gets, the more powerful the growth can become. But the bigger the balance gets, the more every drag matters too. A small fee on a small account is annoying. A small fee on a large account can become a real line item. So when you hear a milestone claim, don't just ask whether it sounds motivating, ask what assumptions are hiding underneath it. What monthly contribution is being used? What return is being assumed? Are fees included? Is inflation ignored? Does the example start at zero or does it start with a pile that took decades to build? Those questions turn hype back into math. This is especially important with the phrase, the math will blow your mind. The mind-blowing part is not that a spreadsheet can make any dream look easy. The real surprise is that the same formula can tell two very different stories depending on the base. With a tiny base, the formula mostly rewards the deposits. With a large base, the formula starts rewarding the money that was already there. That's the hidden switch. And one more layer matters. Even among stockholding families, the starting pile is very uneven. The Fed data shows conditional median stock holdings of about $12,600 for the bottom half, $53,200 for the upper middle group, and $608,000 for the top decile. Same market, very different starting line. That's why this subject can feel unfair. A 7% assumption on $12,600 is not the same lived experience as a 7% assumption on $608,000. The percentage is identical, the dollar force is completely different. So here's the practical framework. Use a milestone workshare audit. Start with the balance, add the monthly contribution, choose an assumption range, not one magic return, add time, then subtract the drag, fees, taxes, inflation, withdrawals, and the possibility that bad years arrive at the wrong time. The question isn't, when do I become rich? The useful question is, at this milestone, who's doing the next dollar of work? That question protects you from two bad stories. The first bad story says compounding is magic, so any tiny amount should eventually solve everything. The second bad story says the early grind means compounding is fake. Both are wrong. Compounding is real, but it needs a base. The first $100,000 builds the engine. The next milestones show whether the engine is finally pushing back. The audit also gives you a calmer way to judge your own progress without turning this into personal advice. If the account is still person-heavy, the slow feeling is not automatically failure. It may simply mean the base is still small. If the account is shared work, the machine is waking up. If the account is pile-heavy, the same percentage can create dollar movement that used to require years of deposits. Now the opening contradiction makes sense. $0 to $100,000 can feel harder than $1 million to $2 million because the dollar amount is not the only thing changing. The worker is changing. Early on, Marcus does most of the work. Later, the pile starts doing more of it. The first climb is person-heavy. The later doubling can be pile-heavy. So the final decision lens is simple. When a milestone feels slow, don't only measure the distance left, measure the worker mix. If the account still depends mostly on deposits, the job is building the base. If growth is starting to match deposits, the job is protecting the runway. If growth is doing most of the work, the job is respecting the risk and drag that come with a bigger machine. This is why the audit matters. It turns a milestone from a moral verdict into a map. Slow progress can mean the engine is still small. Fast progress can mean the engine is finally large. Neither one removes the need to check the assumptions. That distinction is small, but it changes how the whole journey feels. That doesn't make the first $100,000 less important. It makes it more important. It's not the finish line, it's the engine block. It's the part where the machine is still small enough that progress feels personal, slow, and sometimes discouraging. But without that engine block, the later machine never gets built. The first $100,000 is not the finish line. It's the part where you build the engine, before the engine is strong enough to push back. If this helped the math click, like the video, comment with the milestone you want broken down next, and subscribe for more plain English financial breakdowns. Thanks.